Yes, there is now a native Linux build for Kitten Space Agency, but it is still very much in progress, like the entire game. Let's take a look at it. Hello everybody, and welcome! Believe it or not, one of the most requested features for the upcoming space simulation game Kitten Space Agency is a native Linux build. Or the Linux people are just the most vocal about their requests. Be that as it may, Rocketworks CEO Dean Hall said on the KSA forums that the team is looking into providing an actual native Linux build for the game. This is huge news for the open software and Linux community that rely not on Microsoft Windows or on macOS or any other proprietary operating system, but on the free and available Linux. Which of course comes in a bunch of dozen flavors like Arch and Gentoo and Debian and Ubuntu and Mint and Manjaro and, well, you can pick your poison. And if you haven't seen yet, I did a video on my journey towards Linux, and I'll talk about my switch and where things stand at the moment at the end of this video. First, if you don't know, Kitten Space Agency is sort of the spiritual successor to Kerbal Space Program, the beloved space simulation game, after the development of that was completely shuttered by former publisher Take-Two and the intellectual property sold off to a private equity firm. A lot of the former original developers, including KSP creator Harvester, are now working on Kitten Space Agency, which has given the community a lot of hope that this might actually be a fantastic, unofficial sequel. And if you're interested how all of this is coming together and where the game is currently at, make sure you're subscribed to this channel so you won't miss an update. Let me quickly read you the entire statement by Dean Hall on the forums. He posted this in the One True Linux thread on the forums where people list their experience with getting KSA to run on Linux and where maybe some hiccups are and what you can do to make it work. And yes, I've also posted my results there. So here's what Dean said. Figured I would provide an update here. We do want to provide native Linux support that is a Linux download. We've done initial testing producing local Linux builds, and we have set up a download repository to push builds to. In the coming months, we will start pushing to both the Win and Linux deployments. This will then allow us to test the feasibility of building, deploying, and supporting Linux builds natively. This is more a declaration of intent than an actual announcement. They do want to provide the Linux build, but they have not completely committed to it yet. Why is that? Well, there's a lot of things you have to consider when you're talking about build pipelines and continuous delivery and continuous integration and all that good stuff that makes modern development actually work. We know from various interviews and statements by Dean that a lot of the people working on KSA are not natively working on Windows, but for instance on MacBooks, or they're working on Linux distributions on their machines, etc. But so far the game has of course targeted the biggest gamer market, which is Windows-based. One of the words that's emphasized here is supporting Linux builds natively. That means not just throwing it out there and you figure it out yourself, but Rocketworks, the developers or the support people working at Rocketworks, actually making sure that it works and getting it into a stable version that you can use without too much hassle. That is a big deal, because you don't get that if you use any emulation or rather compatibility layers like Wine or Proton. Basically, with those you have to hope that that layer in between the game and you works correctly and interprets everything correctly and returns something that Linux and the attached hardware can understand. And as we can see from the feedback in the One True Linux thread, it's not always working out fine. Me personally, I had great results with Proton and also with Wine through bottles, but your mileage may vary. Okay, enough of the introductions. let's talk about the current state of the native Linux build. And keep in mind, while I'm recording this, things are so much in motion that it could already be different when you're watching this video. The native Linux build is available over ksa-linux.awu.com, and you immediately get greeted by a wonderful penguin and the notification that yes, this is very much a work in progress and bugs should be expected. So use this at your own risk. The first build was just provided as a tarball, which increased file size compared to what we have now, which is a tar.gz file, basically a zipped tarball, making it a lot more compressed and therefore reducing file size. Nevertheless, since this is still a bit larger than the file that's provided for a Windows user, Rocketworks has kindly asked the Linux users to consider contributing to the game via the option on the AWU website. And the Linux community delivered, because I think overnight the contributions increased from like 120,000 to over 130,000. So good on you, Linux community, for supporting this game. I installed the native build on my gaming PC with Cache OS and running Wayland and KDE Plasma 6 as a desktop environment. Just open the tarball, extract the files where you want to have them, and launch the KSA application. And it just worked right out of the box without any tweaking necessary. At least on Nvidia graphics cards. I have read from people that are using AMD cards that had to go through some hoops or where the game didn't even work as a native Linux build. So if you're running an AMD card, be aware of that. At first glance, everything appears to be the same as in the Windows build or the Windows build via Proton. However, I noticed some UI glitches in full screen mode, which are also present in full screen mode when I'm running it through Proton, but not that much. I felt like the performance is a bit worse than it was when I'm using the Windows build. And I was not able to switch it to windowed mode or to any other resolution than my full resolution of this screen that I'm using, which is 3840 by 1600 pixels. There are also some corresponding error messages in the game's log relating to Wayland. If we compare this to running KSA Windows on Linux through Proton, in my case I'm running Proton through the Bottles application, which enables me to have multiple different wine versions depending on which type of application I want to run with, which type of dependencies or wine tricks or Proton tricks or whatever. Personally, I found this much more comfortable than going through Steam, especially when you want to install the game again when a new build comes around. And here the window option works just fine. I can change the resolution. So for my use case where I record games in a 1440p resolution, this is a lot more comfortable. So it works, but there is a lot of work still to be done. And if you watch the KSA Discord and the updates that Dean Hall has provided, you can see that there is a lot of work being done right now to the Linux build. This is new territory for the developers, and there is probably a lot of stuff that is going to be happening in this space over the next coming days, weeks, months, and maybe it proves to be too much of a hassle for them and they will shut it down. This can happen. As I said before, they want to enable support for Linux builds, and if it proves to be too much work and thus the main work of developing the game gets left behind, then they will drop that. At least that's my assessment of the current situation. Still, we have to commend the developers for doing this even at such an early stage of development. And to be honest, for the game to really be successful at the current state of things, with Linux barely making up 4% of gamers, at least according to the Steam survey, this portion of the community is not the biggest audience. We just have to accept that for the time being. But hey, we're working on evangelizing everyone and changing that. Yay! To be honest, the most games I've installed in the past month were on Linux and not on Windows. I really want to focus playing games and using software on my Linux installation and really stay as far away from Windows as I can. One question probably remains for all of you guys out there: why even bother with a native Linux build and not focus on making it as compatible as possible with Proton or Wine? Well, if you remember, Dean Hall always said that Kitten Space Agency should be a so-called forever game, meaning the game itself should be an encapsulated thing that is as independent as possible and does not have to rely on third-party tools or applications or APIs or any other thing to work. So if you run Linux, you want to just have KSA and be able to run that and don't have to rely on Proton or Wine or any other app or compatibility layer that has to be maintained by a third party. From the standpoint of a forever game, it also doubly makes sense to not just support Windows but also Linux, because who knows where the market is going to be in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? Maybe people get so fed up with Microsoft jamming AI down our throat everywhere that they will have finally switched to Linux in droves to prevent that. Speaking of which, there are developers already fleeing GitHub because of the AI slop code submissions that have happened there. It's pretty insane what's going on. Gentoo Linux, for instance, have announced that they're completely moving from GitHub to Codeberg, which is a non-profit located in Germany. Let me just close this out by talking about where I'm at with my own Linux journey. If you remember, I kicked my video off by saying I don't use Arch, by the way, because I've used Ubuntu when I did that video. And well, now I kind of use Arch, by the way, because I've switched to CachyOS, which is an Arch derivative, not directly Arch, and I've been enjoying it a lot. Actually, much more than Ubuntu. Installing applications via Pacman is more, I don't know, I wouldn't say intuitive, but it kind of makes more sense for me with Pacman than with apt or apt. How do you say it, apt or apt? Let me know in the comments. Using Ubuntu also made me start to dislike the snap approach, so if I can't find it via Pacman or as an AUR, then I'm going the Flatpak route right now. Which I do, for instance, for the Prusa slicer that I'm using to feed my 3D printer. One thing I'm still struggling is plugins for my audio interface. Not exactly the audio interface, but my audio workstation Reaper, because all the plugins that I have bought and I usually actively use as a template for recording like audio or guitar or whatever, they are Windows based, and so far I haven't had a lot of luck getting those to run under Linux with Yawbridge and other tools that enable kind of support for VST plugins, but not really. I mean, I got the Arturia Analog Studio plugin working, which came in conjunction with my MIDI keyboard that I use, and it works in the sense that I can make sounds out of it, but I have to really squeeze it on top of the screen because the mouse pointer is misaligned with where the UI elements are, and this is quite a hassle. One thing that's really painful is that I cannot use my isotope plugins, which I mainly use for cleaning up my voice when I do videos like this, where I talk a lot. So that's a bummer. One thing that I'm kind of proud of is that I managed to use a prototype program that somebody programmed to read out the power draw for separate pins for the 12-volt high power connector to make sure that they don't fry my GPU. And I managed to take that and create an output that Cooler Control, the application I use to monitor what my temperatures are and how to regulate my fan curves, that Cooler Control understands that output. So I did that and I'm happy with that. What I'm not happy with is you Linux guys out there. Tell me, is there really no other option than OpenRGB to control RGB hardware in my PC? Because OpenRGB has a couple of issues on my system. First of all, reports of it destroying RAM made me really take the approach to keeping it very far away from the RGB in my RAM sticks. And other than that, oftentimes when I shut down my system, either the RGB keeps glowing or it turns into a light show. And here's now a flashing lights warning for everyone. So 3, 2, 1... Yeah, that happens every like 5th PC shutdown, and it's super annoying, and it only goes away if I either boot the thing and then turn it off before I go to the operating system, or if I just cut the power cord. Not cut it, of course, like unplug the PC. And then there are some issues with accessing one of the NTFS drives that I have some of the files on that I want to access even from Linux, but that could be some drive corruption or some weird things with the SATA connector, so I don't think this is Linux's fault. I also don't want to get into a situation where I have to buy new RAM or new SSDs nowadays with the current prices. I mean, geez, have you looked at those lately? And also, have you looked at my Patreon page? Because if you haven't, you can get all of my videos without nasty YouTube ads over there for just a small monthly contribution. Or if one specific video interests you more than others, you can get those individually if you like. If my production schedule permits, on the highest tier you will get earlier access to videos, and on some of the higher tiers your name will show up here, together with all of these wonderful people. Not just from Patreon, but also from YouTube membership, where you can find the button below this video. Thanks to everyone for all your ongoing support, I really appreciate this. And I would appreciate if you would tell me of your experience with Linux, if you have any, or if you want to get your feet wet with it sometime in the near future. Let me know in the comments down below, and let's get this journey rolling. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel for more and follow me on my social thingies. The links are in the description. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.